In future stories, will Hellboy ever come to New England?
Have I not done? Yeah, it's funny because I just became aware very recently that I've done almost nothing about Hellboy in America, and I think because as folklore has been more and more the focus of Hellboy. Folklore to me, being American, I never think of America having folklore. So I'm, jumping into Europe all the time. And then I did this story, The Crooked Man, which I did a lot of research on to come up with something that was very authentically Appalachian, West Virginia, mountain folklore. So it's really just a matter of me sitting down with a really good book of folk tales, legends of New England, and finding something I can rip off. Because when I put Hellboy in places, most of the time, my goal is to do something that feels like that region. I've done a couple stories with Hellboy lately with Richard Corbin because he's so good at drawing the real world that they are stories that take place, like they'll start in a diner. But usually, because Richard's in Kansas, I say, I'll set it in your neck of the woods. There's actually another story coming up where Hellboy's on a farm. So there's a couple American Hellboy stories coming, but they're not folklore related. But I would love to do something that feels like New England. So if you got any suggestions, let me know.
I have one. You could try The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. I'd love to see him on a horse. That'd be cool.
I would love
he was down on a horse in Wild Hunt. Yeah, trying to find an artist who wants to draw horses is always tricky. But I've thought about that. But to me, Legend of Sleepy Hollow is Washington Irving, and so I've always been kind of leery of does it really feel like folklore, or is it me ripping off a particular writer? But that would actually be good. That's to me, that's like in a way the easy solution, but it might be the most fun solution, is to sit down and not just reread Sleepy Hollow, but Irving did a whole string of those stories. So the idea of doing a Hellboy story that's my very obvious nod to Washington Irving, that would be great. I've talked to another artist recently who's a big fan of the greatest English ghost story writer, M.R. James, and he's wanted to do an M.R. James thing. So I was like, well, why don't we, instead of doing an actual M.R. James story, why don't we take a bunch of M.R. James stories, kind of mush them up in a blender, and turn it into a Hellboy story that feels like a very obvious homage to M.R. James. Just like The Crooked Man, even though it's not based on a Manly Wade Wellman short story, Wellman wrote a lot of stories about the Appalachian Mountains. So that story really feels like, even though it's entirely folklore based, it feels like a Manly Wade Wellman story, which is the highest praise I can get if somebody says that. In fact, when we do the collection of The Crooked Man, which comes out later this year, we fortunately had a couple extra pages, so we inserted an article about Manly Wade Wellman in the back. But yeah, this is something that interests me more and more because I am a book guy. The idea of doing Hellboy stories that feel like this writer, or do one that feels like a Hammer film, or do one that feels like a Jack Kirby monster comic. I'd love to do that. I just, for whatever reason, it hasn't clicked yet. But I'll do that. I'll do a Washington Irving one.
Well, my real question was, you keep using the word work to explain to everybody else, and the fact that you do use it to make money. But when you go to your studio in the morning and spend all day there, is that what you're thinking in your head, I'm working? Or are you thinking, I'm having fun? Because when I do my jewelry, I go play. I might sell it, but I'm in there playing.
Well, I've been doing it 25 years, 7 days a week. There are days where it's work. Yeah, there are days I don't want to be, especially, I just did this, I penciled these couple stories for this Screw and Head collection, and every day, and it went on for about a month, every day, I couldn't wait to get in the studio. I couldn't wait to sit in there and draw. And part of it is because of all the film stuff and things like that, and writing, which writing to me is work. I love making shit up. I hate writing it down. I hate, cobbling together sentences and spell check and all that. I hate that stuff, but I love making shit up, and they haven't yet come up with a machine that'll drag that stuff straight out of my head. So that writing's work. The penciling, that was so much fun. That was nothing but playing. But then I had to ink all those stories, and that's fun for a while, and then it just became a grind, and then a deadline became involved. And the last week I was in the studio, and there were some nice spots, some bits were fun, but I knew I had to be there, and I knew I had to be there till midnight every night to get this thing done, and that was work. But mostly, it's fun.
Have you ever, besides The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, have you ever considered doing anything based on Stephen King, like It, for example, where Hellboy meets Pennywise or something?
That's Stephen King's world, and I suspect not only would I not be interested in doing it because it is Stephen King's world, I suspect I would be sued out of existence. So
It's just this, and I'm not asking for much. I'm just, it wouldn't hurt. Pass.
yeah, no, it's, I mean, Stephen King does what he does, and he draws from his sources, and I do what I view, not to put myself on any kind of anywhere near the same level, but he and I do what we do. We take whatever material we draw on and we make our stories. So he's making his stories, I'm making my stories, Chris Golden's making his stories, Charlene Harris is making her stories, but I'm drawing on source material that is copyright free. The beauty of drawing on folklore and mythology is A, you don't have to make up names, because you're pulling them out of a book. And I hate making up names. I've only made up, I think, 2 original names in all of Hellboy. And it's, you know it's free. You know you can use it.
Well, I'm sorry. I would like to see that happen one day, but
Ask Stephen King. If Steve calls and says he wants to do a crossover, I think we could, I'd be happy to do it.
That'd be fine. If it were it, that's fine.
Okay.
Hey, Mike, love your work.
Yes.
Some of my first exposure to Hellboy was in a freebie I got, which crossed Hellboy over with Ghost, I think it was.
You got it for free? It wasn't intended to be free, so I guess they just couldn't sell it.
At any rate, no, actually we were doing promotions, and we got sent some stuff from Dark Horse. But outside of the crossovers with their in-house characters, have you been approached to do any Hellboy crossover with, say, like DC, like Hellboy meets Superman or Batman or anything?
We did do Hellboy Batman.
Okay, sorry, missed it.
In fact, well, that's good because there's a trade paperback collection coming out sometime this year. I've got an amazing amount of books coming out this year, which is cool. I did the Hellboy Ghost and I did Hellboy Batman, and so those are being collected into one book. And I do occasionally get approached about that. I almost always say no. There's one artist who I really like who does a very cool little independent comic, and I've said he can use Hellboy in a couple issues of his book because it's just a guy I'm a big fan of. But for the most part, I don't want to do it. I've done it. Don't need to do it again.